The vampire king's court believed his son was dying of an ancient curse. The royal physicians claimed Prince Alaric's blood had been poisoned by forbidden magic. For 20 years, the heir to the obsidian throne screamed in agony every nightfall, his veins glowing with unnatural fire until he was restrained like a rabid beast in the palace infirmary. Then came Mira Voss, an embonded human maid with nothing but forbidden texts and moon salt in her pockets. She didn't believe the whispers of madness. She believed in what her eyes could see. And when she defied every law of the Shadow Court to examine the writhing prince, her fingers traced something impossible beneath his pale skin. Not a spell cast upon him, but something living inside his veins. A sigil. Pulsing. Feeding. Growing. What she unraveled that night beneath the throne hall wouldn't just save an heir. It would shatter a kingdom. Hi, my beautiful family. Thank you for sticking around with me through our trying times. I really appreciate your love and support. We're finally back again to give you many more beautiful stories. If you're ready to discover what happens when a human maid defies an entire vampire court to save a dying prince and uncovers a conspiracy that will shatter a kingdom, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as thrilling as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. The obsidian gates of the Nightborn Palace rose like black fangs against the blood-red sky, daring the unworthy to cross its threshold. For Mira Voss, an embonded human with worn servant's clothes and an empty coin purse, fear was a luxury she'd never been able to afford. She needed this position. The evening wind carried the scent of night-blooming roses and something older, ancient vampire magic that clung to the air like perfume and threat combined. Mira clutched her leather satchel tighter as she approached the servant's entrance, the forbidden texts inside pressing against her ribs like a secret heartbeat. She had heard the rumors. Everyone had. Lord Cashendraven, the vampire king, had conquered the eastern territories with ruthless efficiency, his name whispered in fear across 3 kingdoms. But it was his private life that servants gossiped about in shadowed corners. His consort, Lady Evelyn, was beautiful and remote as winter. His son, the heir, was said to be unstable, a damaged prince, unfit to rule, cursed by blood or birth or divine punishment. Mira was met at the iron-banded door by Matron Celeste, the head of household staff. The woman had silver hair pulled so tight it seemed to stretch her face into a permanent expression of displeasure, and eyes that assessed Mira like meat at market. "You're the new one? Mira Voss." Matron Celeste's voice could have etched glass. "Yes, ma'am," Mira said, lowering her gaze as embonded humans were expected to do. "I'm here for the Nightborn wing position." Matron Celeste's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Wing position? Don't flatter yourself, girl. You're here to clean blood and change linens. 7 maids have quit in the last 6 months. The prince is difficult. If he lashes out, you do not flinch. If he screams, you do not react. If you speak of what you witness, you will be executed for treason. Do you understand?" "I understand," Mira whispered, though her heart hammered against her chest. "Good. The Shadow Court demands absolute discretion regarding the prince's condition. If you disturb Lady Seraphine Blackthorn, the king's advisor who resides in the East Tower, you'll find yourself bleeding out in the lower dungeons." Matron Celeste's smile didn't reach her eyes. She has very little patience for human mistakes. Mira nodded, her throat dry. She was led through a labyrinth of vaulted corridors, past walls hung with crimson tapestries and portraits of ancient Nightborn ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow her movement. The palace was breathtaking, all Gothic arches and golden candelabras, but underneath the beauty, Mira sensed something wrong. The air felt stagnant, heavy with old grief and newer secrets. When they reached the infirmary doors beneath the throne hall, Matron Celeste produced a black iron key. "Clean the chamber. Change his restraints if they've torn. Leave the blood wine and medicinal drafts. Do not touch him unless absolutely necessary. Do not attempt healing magic. You have none, and vampire physicians have already tried everything." She paused, her expression briefly softening into something almost like pity. And do not expect gratitude. The prince hasn't spoken coherently in years. The door opened with a groan of old hinges, and the scent hit Mira like a physical blow. It wasn't just the metallic tang of blood. It was the smell of infection, of fever, of something fundamentally wrong with the air itself, a corruption that had been allowed to fester for far too long. The infirmary was vast and cathedral-like, lit by flickering torches and one massive chandelier shaped like twisted branches. Heavy curtains blocked the moonlight from the high windows. In the center of the room, on a stone examination table bound with leather restraints, lay Prince Alaric Nightborn. He was in his human form, which made the sight somehow worse. He should have looked regal, the son of the most powerful vampire in the realm, but instead he looked broken. His pale skin was covered in a thin sheen of feverish sweat. His dark hair was matted to his forehead. The restraints around his wrists and ankles were worn smooth from decades of nightly struggle. As Mira took a tentative step forward, Alaric's eyes snapped open. They glowed crimson with feral pain, pupils blown wide. His body arched violently against the stone, muscles straining, and a sound tore from his throat. Not quite a scream, but close. A sound of someone who had been suffering for so long that agony had become his only language. Sure. Mira soothed instinctively, though she knew he couldn't hear her through whatever torment gripped him. I'm not here to hurt you. Alaric thrashed harder, his head slamming back against the stone with a crack that made Mira wince. But it was what she saw next that made her freeze. As his body convulsed, his skin seemed to glow from within, faint silver-blue lines tracing patterns beneath the surface, like veins of liquid moonlight. They pulsed in rhythm with his screams. That wasn't natural. That wasn't any curse Mira had read about. She began her work quietly, keeping her distance. She cleared away the untouched blood wine, replaced fouled linens, scrubbed dried blood from the floor. All the while, she watched him. He didn't move like someone simply in pain. His head tilted at an odd angle, always to the left, as though something inside him was pulling his body out of alignment. Every few minutes, tremors would race up his spine, making his back bow like something was trying to crawl out from inside. It was heartbreaking. It was also wrong. By the time the moon had fully risen, casting silver light through gaps in the curtains, Alaric had collapsed into unconscious stillness. His breathing was shallow and ragged. Mira knew the rules. Do not touch the prince. Do not interfere with royal blood. But something in her chest, some deeply buried instinct from her grandmother's teachings, was screaming at her that this wasn't divine punishment or ancient magic gone wrong. This was something far worse. She retrieved a small vial of moon salt from her satchel, dissolved it in warm water from the pitcher. I'm sorry, she whispered, though he couldn't hear her. But I have to know. Slowly, she approached the stone table. When she finally reached out and placed her damp cloth against his left shoulder, Alaric's entire body went rigid. His crimson eyes flew open, wide with terror and warning, but he was too exhausted to fight. It's all right, Mira murmured, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. I just need to see. She began to clean the sweat from his skin, gentle and methodical. As the moon's salt water touched him, something extraordinary happened. The faint blue lines beneath his skin grew brighter, more defined. They weren't veins. They were symbols. Arcane script written in his own blood, glowing like trapped starlight. Myra's breath caught. She moved the cloth along his collarbone, down toward his chest, following the pattern. As her fingers pressed slightly against his sternum, Alaric's eyes rolled back and he made a sound that wasn't quite a scream. It was recognition. Horror. As though he'd been trying to tell someone about this for 20 years and no one had listened. Myra's hands shook as she pressed the cloth lower, tracing the lines that branched out from his heart like roots of a poison tree. And there, just beneath the surface of his skin, she felt it. Something solid. Something foreign. Something that pulsed with its own terrible heartbeat. A sigil. Not cast upon him. Implanted within him. Living inside his veins. Oh gods, Mira breathed, staggering backward. Her cloth dropped to the floor with a wet slap. Alaric's eyes found hers through the haze of his pain. For just a moment, his expression cleared, lucid, aware, desperate. He couldn't speak, but his eyes said everything. "Help me, please." Someone finally helped me. Mira looked down at her hands, at the moon salt residue still glowing faintly on her fingertips. She looked at the tools the vampire physicians had left behind, useless, elaborate, designed for magic that strengthened the curse instead of breaking it. She thought of the sacred ash hidden in her satchel, the purification prayers her grandmother had taught her before humans were forbidden from practicing their old faith in vampire lands. This wasn't an ancient curse. This wasn't divine punishment. This was deliberate, calculated, murder disguised as misfortune. And Mira had just become the only person in the kingdom who knew the truth. Mira didn't sleep that night. She couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those silver-blue lines writhing beneath Prince Alaric's skin like serpents trapped under ice. She lay on the thin straw mattress in the servants' quarters, a cramped stone room she shared with 5 other human maids, and listened to their quiet breathing in the darkness. None of them knew what she'd seen. None of them would care if they did. Survival in the Nightborn Palace meant keeping your head down, your mouth shut, and your curiosity buried so deep it suffocated. Mira had learned that lesson young. She'd been 11 when her grandmother died, leaving her alone in the ruins of what had once been a moon priest sanctuary. The old woman had taught her things that were now forbidden: how to read the old human script, how to recognize the properties of sacred herbs, how to mix moon salt with blessed water to reveal hidden magic. "Our people had power once," her grandmother would whisper while grinding dried lavender by candlelight. Before the vampires claimed dominion, humans knew how to heal, how to purify, how to see truth beneath glamour and lies. But that was before the unification. Before Lord Cashendraven conquered the free human territories and declared all old faiths illegal. Moon priests were executed or scattered. Their texts were burned. Their knowledge was branded heresy. Mira had hidden her grandmother's journals in the false bottom of her traveling trunk, along with carefully wrapped vials of moon salt, sacred ash, and dried nightshade root. She'd spent 12 years moving from village to village, working as a seamstress, a kitchen maid, and herbalist's assistant, never staying long enough for anyone to ask questions about the girl who could read ancient scripts and knew too much about purification rituals. When the posting for the Nightborn Palace had appeared on the job board in the last town, Mira had almost walked past it. Palace work meant scrutiny. It meant living under the constant watch of vampire nobility who viewed humans as little more than useful cattle. But the pay was triple what she'd make anywhere else. And she was tired. So tired of running. She should have known better. The morning bell clanged at dawn, dragging Mira from her restless half-sleep. Around her, the other maids groaned and rose, pulling on their gray servant dresses in the pre-dawn chill. None of them spoke to her. And bonded humans were the lowest tier in the palace hierarchy, below even the bonded servants who'd sworn blood oaths to noble families. At least bonded servants had protection, patronage, a vampire lord who would defend them if they were accused of wrongdoing. And bonded servants, like Mira, were disposable. "Heard the prince screamed for 3 hours last night," muttered Greta, an older woman with burned scars across her forearms from years working the palace kitchens. "Cook says it's getting worse. Says Lord Cashen is bringing in physicians from the Eastern Covens now." "Won't matter," another maid whispered. "My sister works in the Shadow Court archives. She says the prince has been examined by every magical healer in the realm. Nothing works. Some say he's being punished for sins in a past life. Or maybe he's just mad," Greta said with a shrug. "Vampire royalty. Too much power. Not enough humanity left. Inbreeding catches up eventually." Mira said nothing. She braided her dark hair, laced her boots, and followed the others down to the servants' hall for the morning meal of thin porridge and yesterday's bread. The human servants ate separately from the vampire staff, in a basement room that smelled of mildew and old disappointment. Matron Celeste swept through during breakfast, distributing assignments with military efficiency. Mira Voss. You're on the Nightborn wing again. Day shift this time. Clean the infirmary, stock the medical supplies, prepare the chamber for tonight's physicians. Several maids glanced at Mira with barely concealed pity. Night shift was bad enough, watching the prince suffer in the darkness. But day shift meant seeing the aftermath. The blood-stained restraints. The claw marks on the stone table where he'd fought against his bonds. The evidence of 2 decades of torment without relief. Yes, ma'am, Mira said quietly. And Voss. Matron Celeste's expression hardened. Do not touch the prince. Several physicians will be examining him this afternoon. Lord Cashin has made it clear that any interference from unqualified servants will result in immediate execution. Touching royal blood without permission is treason. Do you understand? I understand, Mira lied. The infirmary was silent when she arrived. The torches had burned low during the night, and morning sunlight filtered weakly through the gaps in the heavy curtains. Prince Alaric lay motionless on the stone table, his restraints loosened but not removed. No guards stood watch. No healers attended him. He was alone. Completely, utterly alone. Myra's chest tightened with a fury she hadn't expected. He was the heir to the throne, the son of the most powerful vampire in the known world, and they'd left him here like discarded refuse after his nightly torment had finally exhausted itself. She approached slowly, her soft-soled boots making no sound on the stone floor. Up close, she could see the damage more clearly. His wrists were raw beneath the leather restraints, rubbed bloody from thrashing. His lips were cracked and pale, but it was the fever radiating from his skin that made her pause. Mira had tended enough sick patients to recognize infection when she felt it. She held her hand a few inches above Alaric's chest and felt the unnatural heat rising from him in waves. This wasn't normal vampire physiology. Their kind ran cold, their bodies maintaining temperatures just above death. This was wrong. As sunlight shifted across the table, catching the edge of Alaric's exposed collarbone, Mira saw it again, those faint silver-blue lines beneath his skin, more visible now in the natural light. They branched out from his chest like roots of a corrupted tree, pulsing almost imperceptibly with their own rhythm. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Moonsalt reveals what darkness hides, child. Magic meant to deceive cannot hide from the old ways. Mira glanced toward the door. The physicians wouldn't arrive for hours. The servants were busy with morning duties. If she was going to look, truly look, it had to be now. She pulled the small vial of moonsalt from the hidden pocket in her apron. Her hands shook as she mixed it with water from the washing basin, whispering the old prayer her grandmother had taught her. By moon and salt and sacred light, reveal the truth hidden from sight. The water shimmered faintly, taking on an opalescent quality. Mira soaked a clean cloth in the mixture and gently pressed it against Alaric's chest, just above his heart. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The silver-blue lines flared bright beneath his skin, spreading outward like cracks in glass. But they weren't random. They were deliberate. Intentional. Arcane script written in living magic, forming symbols Mira recognized from her grandmother's most forbidden texts. Blood sigils. The kind used for curses that fed on the victim's own life force. And there, at the center of the pattern where the lines converged just below his sternum, something moved. Pulsed. A knot of dark magic writhing like a parasite embedded in his flesh. Myra's breath caught. This wasn't a curse placed on him from outside. This was inside him. Woven into his blood, his veins, his very existence. Gods, she whispered. Who did this to you? Alaric's eyes fluttered, but didn't open. His breathing hitched, and for a moment, his expression crumpled with an anguish so profound it made Myra's throat close with unshed tears. She looked down at her hands, at the moonsalt solution still dripping from her cloth, at the forbidden tools hidden in her quarters, sacred ash, purification oils, the extraction needles her grandmother had used to remove dark magic from corrupted wounds. Touching royal blood without permission meant death. Attempting to heal a prince using heretical human methods meant execution for the entire bloodline, if she'd had won. But leaving him like this, leaving him to suffer when she might be the only person in the palace who could see what was really happening, that wasn't something Mira could live with. She carefully cleaned the moon salt water from Alaric's skin and stepped back. Tonight. She would return tonight with everything she needed. And if they executed her for trying to help him, at least she would die knowing she hadn't looked away. The silver-blue lines faded slowly beneath his skin, but now that Mira had seen them, she couldn't unsee them. The truth glowed in her mind like a brand. Prince Alaric Nightborn wasn't cursed by fate or divine punishment. Someone had done this to him deliberately. And Mira was going to find out who. Mira returned that night with her grandmother's extraction kit hidden beneath her apron, a leather roll containing silver needles, a vial of sacred ash, consecrated oil, and an obsidian blade so old its handle had worn smooth from generations of moon priest hands. The infirmary was empty again. The Eastern Coven physicians had examined Alaric for 3 hours that afternoon, performed elaborate rituals involving blood crystals and incantations in the old vampiric tongue, then left shaking their heads. Matron Celeste had whispered to another servant that they'd declared the prince's condition beyond magical intervention, which meant they'd given up on him. Again. Mira waited in the shadows until the moon rose fully, watching through the gap in the curtains as silver light spilled across the stone floor. She'd learned the pattern now. Alaric's fits began precisely at moonrise, as though something inside him was synchronized with the lunar cycle. Right on schedule, his body went rigid. His back arched off the table with such violence that the leather restraints creaked. The sound that tore from his throat was raw and animal, a scream that had worn grooves into his vocal cords from 2 decades of repetition. Mira stepped forward, her heart hammering. "I'm here," she said softly, though she knew he couldn't hear her through the agony. "I'm going to help you." She worked quickly, her hands steady despite her fear. Sacred ash mixed with consecrated oil, the mixture forming a pale gray paste that smelled of smoke and ancient prayer. Her grandmother's voice guided her from memory. Ash reveals corruption. Oil binds the revelation. Blood calls to blood, but faith breaks the chain. Mira dipped her fingers into the paste and pressed them against Alaric's chest, directly over his heart where the silver-blue lines converged. She whispered the purification prayer, words in a language older than the vampire kingdoms, older than the unification, passed down through generations of moon priests who'd understood that some magic could only be countered by belief made manifest. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. The sigil erupted into visibility beneath Alaric's skin like fire catching on oil-soaked cloth. Intricate arcane script blazed silver blue across his entire torso, down his arms, coiling around his throat like chains made of corrupted starlight. The symbols pulsed and writhed, alive in a way that made Myra's stomach turn. But it was the center, the knot of dark magic just below his sternum, that made her breath catch. It wasn't just pulsing. It was feeding. She could see it now with terrible clarity, tendrils of the sigil reaching deeper into his body, drinking from his blood, his life force, his very essence. Every beat of his heart fed the curse. Every drop of royal blood strengthened it. Alaric's eyes snapped open. For a moment, they glowed pure crimson with feral intensity. Then something shifted, recognition flooded his gaze. Not recognition of Mira, but of what she was showing him, what had been done to him. He made a sound that wasn't quite a scream. It was rage. Pure, distilled fury breaking through 2 decades of mindless suffering. His body convulsed, but this time he was fighting the sigil itself, not the restraints. Fighting the thing that had been devouring him from the inside since he was a child. "Stop," Mira said urgently, pressing her ash-covered hands more firmly against his chest. "Don't fight it yet. Let me see it first." She traced the lines with trembling fingers, following the pattern. The sigil was masterwork, so intricately woven into his vascular system that removing it incorrectly would kill him instantly. But there were weak points. Places where the arcane script overlapped, where the magic had to bend around the natural flow of his blood. And there, at the outer edges near his left shoulder, she found it an anchor point. A place where the sigil connected to his skin rather than diving deeper into muscle and bone. "This is going to hurt," Mira whispered. "I'm sorry." She pressed sacred ash directly onto the anchor point and spoke the severance prayer. The sigil reacted like a living thing, convulsing violently. The lines flared so bright Mira had to squint against the glare. Alaric's scream shattered the silence, but this time, underneath the agony, there was something else. Relief. The anchor point dissolved under her fingers, the arcane script unraveling thread by thread. It was only one connection point out of dozens, but it was enough. The sigil's hold weakened fractionally, its feeding rhythm disrupted. Mira worked for what felt like hours, carefully breaking the outer connections one at a time. Sweat dripped down her back. Her hands were cramped from maintaining the precise pressure needed to dissolve the curse without triggering its defensive mechanisms. Several times, the sigil lashed back, sending tendrils of pain shooting up her arms that made her gasp. But she didn't stop. Finally, as the moon reached its apex, something inside the curse fractured. Not broken entirely, the central knot remained intact, but damaged enough that its feeding cycle interrupted. The silver-blue lines dimmed, flickered, then faded to barely visible traces beneath Alaric's skin. The prince's body went limp. His breathing, which had been ragged and desperate, slowly evened out. The fever radiating from his skin began to cool. And then, for the first time in 20 years, Prince Alaric Nightborn slept. Mira staggered backward, her legs shaking. She stared at his face, watching the tension drain from features that had known nothing but torment. His expression smoothed. His hands, which had been clenched into fists, relaxed. He looked younger suddenly, not a damaged heir, but simply a young man finally granted mercy. "Sleep," Mira whispered, tears burning her eyes. "Just sleep." She cleaned the sacred ash from his skin with trembling hands, packed away her tools, and slipped toward the door just as dawn began to lighten the edges of the heavy curtains. She'd done it. She'd actually. "You there. Stop." Mira froze. Two palace guards stood in the corridor, their expressions shifting from bored routine to sharp suspicion as they looked past her into the infirmary. "Why is the prince not restrained?" one demanded. "He's sleeping," Mira said carefully. "Sleeping?" The guard pushed past her, staring at Alaric's peaceful form. "That's impossible. The prince doesn't sleep. He screams until dawn, then collapses unconscious." "He never." The guard's eyes narrowed. "What did you do?" "Nothing. I just—" "Fetch Master Corvus," the second guard snapped to his companion. "Now." Within minutes, the infirmary filled with people. Master Corvus, the senior vampire healer who'd attended Alaric for a decade, swept into the room with his elaborate robes billowing. He examined the prince with growing confusion, checking his pulse, his temperature, the barely visible remnants of the sigil beneath his skin. "This is impossible," Corvus muttered. "His blood signature has shifted. The curse pattern has been disrupted?" He whirled on Mira, his ancient eyes blazing with suspicion and something else. Fear. "What did you do to him?" Myra's mouth went dry. Around her, guards moved to block the exits. Matron Celeste appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "I asked you a question, human," Corvus said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "The prince has suffered for 2 decades. Every healer in the realm has failed. And somehow, a unbonded servant maid accomplished what we could not." He stepped closer. "So, I'll ask again. What did you do to Prince Alaric's blood?" Mira looked at Alaric's sleeping face, at the first piece he'd known in living memory, and made her choice. "I helped him," she said quietly. "I'm the only one who actually tried." Master Corvus's expression went cold as winter. "Seize her. And someone wakes Lord Cashin. He needs to know his son's blood has been tampered with by a human using heretical magic." The guards grabbed Myra's arms, and she didn't resist. She'd known this was coming. She'd known the price. But as they dragged her toward the door, she caught one last glimpse of Alaric, still sleeping, still peaceful, still free of agony for the first time since childhood. It was worth it, she thought. Whatever came next, it was worth it. They locked Mira in a windowless storage room while Master Corvus performed his examination. She sat on the cold stone floor, wrists bound with iron cuffs that burned her skin, and listened to the chaos erupting in the infirmary above. First came Corvus's chanting, elaborate vampiric incantations meant to analyze the disruption in Alaric's blood. Then came the screaming. The prince's agony tore through the palace like a blade, so raw and visceral that Mira felt it in her bones. She lurched to her feet, chains rattling. "Stop. You're making it worse." No one listened. The screaming continued for 20 minutes, longer than any fit Mira had witnessed, before finally subsiding into broken, ragged breathing. When the door to her cell finally opened, Master Corvus stood in the threshold looking pale and shaken. "What did you do?" His voice trembled with something between horror and fury. "His blood is corrupted, tainted with human magic. When I tried to stabilize the curse, it reacted like fire touching oil. Because vampire magic feeds it," Mira said desperately. "Can't you see? Every time you try to heal him with your magic, you're strengthening the sigil. It's bonded to royal blood. It uses vampire power as fuel." Corvus's eyes narrowed. "You speak of matters far beyond your understanding, girl. Blood sigils require years of study, access to forbidden texts." He stopped abruptly, studying her with new suspicion. "Who taught you these things?" Mira said nothing. Admitting she was trained by moon priests would mean execution not just for herself, but for anyone she'd ever known. "It doesn't matter," Corvus said finally. "Lord Cashin has been informed. You will remain confined until he decides your fate." They kept her locked away for 3 days. 3 days of silence broken only by the delivery of stale bread and water. 3 days of not knowing if Alaric was suffering, if the sigil had regenerated what she disrupted, if her interference had ultimately done more harm than good. On the 3rd night, the door opened unexpectedly. Matron Celeste stood in the threshold, her expression unreadable. "Come with me. Quickly." Mira was led through servant passages she'd never seen, winding corridors that smelled of mildew and old secrets. "Where are we?" "Silence," Matron Celeste hissed. "The Shadow Court wants you executed immediately." "But Lady Evelyn—" She paused, her voice softening almost imperceptibly. "The Queen Consort believes you may be the prince's only chance. She's convinced Lord Cashin to allow one more attempt. If you fail, you die. If you succeed, you still may die. Do you understand?" "I understand," Mira whispered. They arrived at a different chamber, smaller, more private, lit by a single chandelier. Alaric lay on a cushioned examination table, restrained but conscious. His crimson eyes tracked Myra's entrance, and for the first time, she saw genuine awareness in them. Recognition. "You came back," he rasped, his voice rough from disuse but coherent. Actually, impossibly coherent. "Your Highness," Mira breathed. "You're speaking." 3 days, Alaric said, each word seeming to cost him effort. 3 days without agony. 3 days where I could think. Remember. His gaze hardened. "What did you do to me?" "I disrupted the outer anchors of the sigil," Mira said. "It's still there, still feeding, but slower. Weaker." "Then finish it." His voice cracked with desperate intensity. "Please. I've been trapped inside my own body for 20 years, screaming without being able to explain, suffering without knowing why. If you can free me." "The human will touch nothing more," a cold voice interrupted. Mira spun. Lord Cashin Draven stood in the doorway, his presence filling the room like winter frost. The Vampire King was exactly as terrifying as the rumors suggested, tall, ancient, with eyes like frozen blood and an expression that had witnessed centuries of death without flinching. Beside him stood a woman in elaborate robes marked with Shadow Court insignia. Lady Seraphine Blackthorn, the king's senior advisor, regarded Mira with undisguised contempt. "My lord," Mira said, dropping immediately to her knees. "I can help him, but I need You need nothing, Lady Seraphine cut in. You are a human servant who committed treason by touching royal blood. The fact that Lord Cashin hasn't executed you already is a mercy you don't deserve. She eased his suffering, Lady Evelyn said quietly, stepping into the room behind them. The queen consort was breathtakingly beautiful, with silver hair and eyes that held centuries of sorrow. For the first time in 2 decades, our son slept peacefully. That should mean something. It means she used heretical magic to tamper with the heir's blood, Lady Seraphine countered. Master Corvus's examination proved vampire healing now triggers violent reactions. She's made him worse, not better. Because vampire magic feeds the curse. Mira couldn't stop herself. The sigil is designed to consume royal blood and vampiric power. Human faith magic disrupts it because we're outside the system it was built to exploit. Silence fell. Lord Cashin studied her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. You speak of the sigil as though it was engineered, deliberately designed. Because it was, Mira said. Curses don't work this way naturally. Someone built this. Someone with intimate knowledge of vampiric blood magic and access to Prince Alaric when he was young enough that the sigil could grow with him. Lady Seraphine's expression flickered, just for a moment, with something that might have been alarm before settling back into cold disapproval. Ridiculous conspiracy theories from a servant trying to save her own life. Let her try, Alaric said suddenly. All eyes turned to him. 3 days of clarity, father. 3 days where I wasn't trapped in mindless agony. If she can give me that permanently, if there's even a chance, his voice broke. Please. The silence stretched. Finally, Lord Cashin nodded once. You may continue. Under guard. If the prince worsens, you die immediately. Over the next week, Mira worked in fragments, stealing minutes, whenever she could slip past the guards. She couldn't risk another full ritual, not with Lady Seraphine's people watching her constantly, so she worked in pieces. A touch of sacred ash here. A whispered prayer there. Slowly, methodically, dissolving the sigil's outer connections one anchor at a time. And Alaric improved. He began speaking in full sentences. His fever broke. The tremors that had plagued him for decades eased. For the first time in memory, he could sit up without assistance, could focus on conversations, could remember what had been said to him more than an hour ago. The court noticed. Whispers changed from the cursed prince to the tampered prince. Nobles who'd written off Alaric as unfit for succession suddenly took interest. And the shadow court, led by Lady Seraphine, watched everything with calculating, suspicious eyes. On the 8th night, Mira was caught. She'd slipped into Alaric's chamber after midnight with her leather roll of tools, intending to work on the central knot of the sigil. She'd just begun the purification prayer when the doors burst open. Guards flooded in, followed by Lady Seraphine herself. Seize her, the advisor commanded. They tore the tools from Myra's hands, displaying them like evidence of murder. The sacred ash, the obsidian blade, the forbidden texts. Lady Seraphine's smile was as cold as winter. Blood corruption. Use of heretical magic on royal flesh. Attempted assassination of the heir. She turned to the guards. Take her to the lower crypts. She is sentenced to execution at dawn. No trial necessary for treason. Is this blatant? No. Alaric struggled against his restraints, clarity burning in his eyes. Father, she's helped me. Can't you see? What I see, Lady Seraphine said smoothly, is a human who has made the prince dependent on forbidden magic, who has corrupted his blood with heretical practices. My lord, surely you see the danger? Lord Cashin's expression was unreadable. Take her. As the guards dragged Mira toward the door, Alaric's scream shattered the night, but this time it wasn't pain. It was pure, incandescent rage. You're killing me, he roared at his father, at the court, at everyone who'd watched him suffer for 2 decades without truly helping. She's the only one who tried, the only one who saw what was being done to me, and you're going to execute her for it. But the doors had already slammed shut, and Mira was gone, dragged down into the darkness below the palace, where traitors waited to die. The lower crypts smelled of old death and older despair. Mira sat in a cell carved from raw stone, wrists shackled to the wall with iron chains that burned like frozen fire against her skin. Through the narrow gap beneath the door, she could see the faint glow of torchlight and hear the distant drip of water echoing through the labyrinth of tunnels. Dawn was coming. She could feel it in her bones, the way her grandmother had taught her to sense the turning of light. 3 hours, maybe 4, before they came for her. She'd expected fear. Instead, she felt a strange, hollow calm. She'd done what she could. For the first time in 20 years, Prince Alaric had known clarity, had spoken coherently, and had understood what was being done to him. If she died for that, at least she wouldn't die knowing she'd looked away. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Heavy boots, multiple guards. Mira closed her eyes. Too soon. Dawn hadn't come yet, but the door that opened wasn't hers. It was the cell 3 down from her position. She could hear the screech of rusted hinges, the wet thud of something being thrown against stone. Then silence. More footsteps. More doors opening and closing. The crypts were filled with prisoners. Or they were clearing space for her execution. Above, in the royal chambers, Lady Evelyn Draven stood before her husband with a sealed wooden box clutched in her trembling hands. "Cashin," she said quietly, "I need you to look at something." Lord Cashin sat in a high-backed chair by the window, staring out at the pre-dawn darkness. He hadn't spoken since ordering Myra's execution 3 hours ago. His silence was more terrifying than rage. "Evie." "Look at it," she insisted, her voice cracking. "Please. Before you execute that girl, just look." She placed the box on the table between them. It was old, sealed with the wax insignia of the Shadow Court archives, a mark that meant the contents were classified, forbidden from general access without council approval. "Where did you get this?" Cashin's voice was dangerously soft. "I stole it," Evelyn said simply. 20 years ago, when Alaric's fits first began. I knew something was wrong, not natural, not right, but every time I raised concerns, the Shadow Court dismissed me. Said I was a grieving mother seeing conspiracy where there was only misfortune. Her hands shook. So, I broke into the archives myself and took the records from that year. I've kept them hidden ever since. Cashin stared at her for a long moment, then broke the seal. Inside were yellow documents, medical reports, council meeting transcripts. He began to read, his expression darkening with each page. Alaric's first fit occurred on the night of the autumn equinox, Evelyn said. September 23rd, 20 years ago. Do you remember what else happened that month? Cashin's jaw tightened. Lord Theron Ashford was promoted to Master Sigilsmith of the Shadow Court. Look at the dates, Evelyn pressed. Theron's promotion was approved on September 10th. He was granted unlimited access to the royal wing, including the nursery, for protective ward installations. Alaric's first fit occurred exactly 13 days later. That's circumstantial. Master Corvus's original diagnosis is in there too, Evelyn interrupted. Read page 7. Cashin flipped through the documents. His face went pale, an impressive feat for someone who'd been a vampire for 4 centuries. The report, written in Corvus's meticulous hand, stated, Prince Alaric's blood shows trace evidence of foreign arcane intrusion. Recommend immediate investigation of recent magical work performed near the heir. Sigil markers detected. Moon phase synchronization, blood bond anchoring, growth adaptive framework. Below Corvus's signature was a second note, added later in different ink. Investigation declined by Shadow Court order. Diagnosis revised to curse of unknown origin. They knew, Cashin breathed. The council knew someone had tampered with his blood, and they buried it. Theron Ashford died 6 years ago, Evelyn said. Conveniently, during a hunting accident before anyone could question him about his work. But he didn't act alone. Someone approved his access. Someone authorized the investigation to be closed. Someone in the Shadow Court orchestrated this. Cashin stood abruptly, the chair scraping against stone. Lady Seraphine was second advisor 20 years ago. she would have had the authority to approve access, to seal records, to ensure no one asked the wrong questions. Evelyn finished. And now a human girl with no political power and no reason to lie has looked at our son and seen exactly what Master Corvus saw 20 years ago, a sigil deliberately implanted in royal blood. Cassian was already moving toward the door. How long until dawn? Less than an hour. Get Alaric. Bring him to the Throne Hall Infirmary. His voice was iron and fury. I'm stopping the execution. In the crypts, Myra's cell door finally opened. 3 guards stood in the threshold, their expressions grim. On your feet, heretic. They unlocked her chains and dragged her upward through the winding tunnels, past cells filled with the condemned and forgotten. Myra's legs shook from 3 days of confinement, but she forced herself to walk with her head high. If she was going to die, she would die with dignity. They emerged not in the execution courtyard as she'd expected, but in the Throne Hall Infirmary, the same chamber where she'd first disrupted Alaric's sigil. Dawn light was beginning to filter through the high windows. The room was filled with people, palace guards, court officials, Master Corvus, looking pale and shaken. And at the center of it all, Lord Cassian Draven stood beside the examination table where his son lay convulsing. Alaric's condition had deteriorated catastrophically. His skin burned with fever. The silver-blue lines of the sigil blazed visible even without moonsalt, writhing beneath his flesh like living serpents. He was screaming again, that terrible, familiar sound of agony that had defined 2 decades of his existence. You said you could help him, Cassian said, his voice cutting through the chaos as Mira was shoved forward. Prove it. Now. Mira stared at him. My lord, the Shadow Court sentenced me to. I am countermanding that sentence, Cassian said coldly. My son is dying. You will save him, or you will die with him. Those are your options. Mira looked at Alaric, at the sigil feeding violently on his suffering, and made her choice. I need my tools. Sacred ash, consecrated oil. Master Corvus, Cassian ordered. Give her what she requires. As Corvus reluctantly retrieved Myra's confiscated supplies, Lady Evelyn appeared at the doorway with an armful of sealed documents. Cassian, the other records, I found more evidence. But she never finished her sentence. Because the moment Lord Cassian stepped closer to the examination table, the moment his ancient, powerful blood came within 3 feet of his suffering son, the sigil reacted. It exploded outward with a force that shattered the nearest window. Alaric's scream reached an inhuman pitch. The silver-blue lines blazed white-hot, spreading across his skin like cracks in porcelain. Blood began to seep from his eyes, his nose, his ears. The sigil wasn't just feeding anymore. It was trying to consume him entirely. And Mira realized with dawning horror what that meant. The curse wasn't designed to torture Alaric forever. It was designed to kill him the moment the Vampire King tried to intervene directly. Get back. Mira shouted at Cassian. Your blood is triggering it. It's designed to destroy him if you get too close. Cassian staggered backward, his expression shattering into something Mira had never expected to see on the face of the most powerful vampire in the realm. Fear. Pure, helpless fear for his dying son. Everyone back, Mira commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos with unexpected authority. Now. If you want him to survive, get away from the table. To her shock, they obeyed. Lord Cassian retreated to the far wall, his hands clenched into fists. Lady Evelyn pressed against the doorframe, her face streaked with tears. The guards and courtiers scattered to the edges of the chamber, leaving Mira alone with the dying prince. The sigil was feeding frantically now, blazing so bright it hurt to look at directly. Alaric's body arched against the restraints, every muscle locked in agony. But his eyes, those crimson eyes, found Myra's through the suffering, pleading silently. Help me. Myra's hands shook as she mixed sacred ash with consecrated oil, whispering prayers her grandmother had taught her decades ago. I'm here, she said softly, pressing her ash-covered palms against Alaric's burning chest. I've got you. The sigil recoiled from her touch like a living thing, the lines contracting away from the sacred ash. Mira worked methodically, tracing the pattern, identifying the connections that had regenerated while she'd been imprisoned. 3 days without interference had allowed the curse to rebuild its outer anchors, strengthening its hold. But she'd learned its structure now. She knew where it was vulnerable. "Talk to me," Mira said as she worked, trying to keep Alaric conscious, aware. "Stay with me, Your Highness." "Alaric," he gasped, his voice raw. "Just Alaric." "Alaric, then." Mira pressed ash into an anchor point near his collarbone and felt it dissolve. "Tell me what you remember, from before the pain started." For a long moment, she thought he couldn't answer. Then, haltingly, words began to emerge. "I was 4, Alaric whispered. "Playing in the nursery. There was a man. Shadow court robes. He said he was installing protective wards." His breath hitched. "He asked me to hold still. Said it would only hurt for a moment." Myra's hands still. "What did he look like?"
"Tall.
Silver hair. Scars on his hands from sigil work." Alaric's eyes closed, remembering. "He smelled like ash and copper, like blood magic. He drew symbols on my chest with something cold. Said they would protect the royal line." His voice broke. Then he pressed his hand against my heart, and everything went white. When I woke up, I was screaming. "Lord Theron Ashford," Lady Evelyn breathed from the doorway. "It has to be. The description matches perfectly." "Dead 6 years," Cashin said grimly. "Convenient." Mira resumed her work, dissolving another anchor point. The sigil was fighting her now, sending tendrils of pain shooting through her arms. She gritted her teeth and pressed harder. "Alaric, I need you to focus. The sigil is bonded to your blood."
"Can you feel it?"
"The way it connects to you." Alaric's brow furrowed in concentration.
"Yes."
"It's everywhere, like roots growing through my veins." "Follow those roots backward," Mira instructed. "Blood remembers. Your body knows who created this curse. The sigil carries the maker's signature." Silence fell as Alaric turned his awareness inward, following the curse's pathways through his own body. Mira watched his face, saw recognition flare in his eyes, then horror. "There's more than one," Alaric whispered. "Theron made the sigil, but someone else activated it. Recently. Within the last few months, the curse was strengthened, modified." His eyes snapped open, glowing with fury. "Someone in this palace has been feeding it, maintaining it." A cold tension filled the chamber. Lord Cashin's voice was deadly quiet.
"Who?"
"I can't see clearly," Alaric gasped. "The signature is masked, but the blood resonance is familiar. Someone I've been near. Someone close to the royal family." Myra's mind raced. Someone with access to Alaric. Someone who would benefit from a weakened heir. Someone in the Shadow Court who could have authorized Theron's work 20 years ago and ensured the investigation was buried. "Lady Seraphine," she breathed. Before anyone could respond, the infirmary doors burst open. The Shadow Court advisor herself swept in, flanked by a dozen guards bearing her personal insignia. Her expression was cold fury. "Lord Cashin, this has gone far enough," Seraphine said sharply. "The human is using forbidden magic on your son. Every moment she touches him risks permanent damage to the royal bloodline. I must insist." "You will insist on nothing," Cashin said, his voice dropping to a growl that made the windows rattle. "I have records, Seraphine. Sealed documents proving you authorized Theron Ashford's access to my son. Proving you closed Master Corvus's investigation." Seraphine's mask of composure cracked for just an instant. "Those records are classified. Lady Evelyn had no authority to." "I am the Vampire King," Cashin interrupted. "I need no authority beyond my own will. You will remain here while the human finishes her work. Then you will answer questions about your involvement in my son's torment." Seraphine's eyes narrowed. Her hand moved almost imperceptibly, touching a ring on her finger. Mira saw the gesture and felt ice slide down her spine. "Cashin, she's triggering something?" The sigil exploded into violent activity. Every line blazed white-hot simultaneously, no longer feeding gradually, but consuming Alaric in a massive surge. His scream tore through the chamber with enough force to crack the stone walls. Mira pressed both hands against the central knot, pouring sacred ash directly onto it, but the curse was too strong now. It had been activated remotely, deliberately, by whoever controlled the anchor spell. "It's eating him alive," Mira gasped. "The sigil has a failsafe. If discovered, it destroys the host to hide the evidence." "Can you stop it?" Cashin demanded. Mira looked at the blazing arcane lines, at Alaric's body convulsing with agony, at the limited supplies she had left. "Not with what I have. I need—" She stopped, a terrible realization dawning. "I need my grandmother's extraction blade, the obsidian one. It's designed specifically for emergency sigil removal." "Master Corvus has your confiscated tools," Lady Evelyn said urgently. "Where?" "I took them to my personal study," Seraphine said coldly. "For evidence preservation."
They're sealed now.
"Unreachable." "You're trying to kill him," Mira breathed, staring at the advisor. "You activated the failsafe. You'd rather see him dead than exposed." Seraphine's smile was a razor's edge. "I have no idea what you're accusing me of, human. But I will say this. Some bloodlines are too corrupted to save. Better a clean death than a tainted heir." Cashin lunged for her, but Seraphine's guards blocked his path. In the chaos, Mira made her choice. She couldn't remove the sigil completely without the proper tools. But she could do something else. "Alaric," she said urgently, pressing her forehead against his. "Listen to me. Your blood remembers. It knows every person who touched this curse. When I disrupt the central knot, the sigil will fight back. But in that moment, you'll see everything. Everyone. The whole conspiracy will be exposed through the blood resonance." "It'll kill me," Alaric gasped. "Maybe," Mira said honestly. "But at least the truth will survive." Through the pain, through the agony, Alaric managed a broken smile. "Do it." Mira placed both hands on the central knot, directly over Alaric's heart. She spoke the most dangerous prayer her grandmother had ever taught her, the severance rite that shattered curses by force rather than careful dissolution. "By moon and salt and sacred rite, by blood that remembers ancient light, I break what should not be. I sever the chains and set him free." The sigil awakened fully. Not just activated, awakened. Conscious. Aware. 20 years of accumulated power detonated outward in a wave of corrupted magic that shattered every window in the chamber. Blood rose from Alaric's veins into the air, forming burning runes that spelled out names, dates, conspiracies written in crimson light. And in the center of it all, blazing brighter than anything else, was a single name connected to the sigil's creation and maintenance. Seraphine Blackthorn. The Shadow Court advisor stared at her name written in Alaric's blood, and for the first time, her composure shattered completely into naked fear. "Seize her," Cashin commanded. But the sigil wasn't finished. It was fighting for its life now, feeding on Alaric with desperate hunger, trying to consume him completely before Mira could break its hold. And Mira realized with dawning horror that she might have just killed the prince she was trying to save. The blood hung suspended in the air like a crimson constellation, each droplet glowing with arcane fire as it spelled out the conspiracy in a burning script. Guards dragged Lady Seraphine backward, but her eyes remained fixed on Alaric's convulsing form with an expression that might have been triumph. "You're too late," she hissed. "The sigil will consume him before you can break it. 20 years of power. You think a human girl with stolen prayers can undo that?" Mira didn't answer. She couldn't. Every ounce of her concentration was focused on the central knot beneath her hands, the heart of the curse that pulsed with malevolent hunger. The sigil was feeding frantically now, drinking Alaric's life force in massive gulps, trying to devour him completely before she could sever its hold. "Mira," Alaric gasped, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "If this doesn't work—" "It will work," Mira said fiercely. But her hands were shaking. The sacred ash was running out. She disrupted the outer anchors, weakened the framework, but the central knot remained intact, a concentrated mass of dark magic wrapped around Alaric's heart like a parasite. She needed the extraction blade, the one Seraphine had hidden. Without it, she'd have to break the curse by force, and that meant, "Do it," Cashin said quietly from across the room. The Vampire King's face was carved from stone, but his voice carried 20 years of helpless watching, of being unable to save his own son. "Whatever you need to do, do it now." Mira met his eyes and saw permission there. Permission to risk everything. Permission to try the most dangerous technique her grandmother had ever taught her, the one reserved for curses so deeply embedded that careful extraction would take too long. Blood purification through direct contact. "I need a blade," Mira said. "Clean, sharp, silver if possible." Master Corvus stepped forward, producing a surgical knife from his robes. His hands trembled as he offered it to her. "This is madness. Opening his vein while the sigil is active is the only way to reach the curse's core," Mira finished. She turned to Alaric, her voice softening. "This is going to hurt worse than anything you felt. The sigil will fight back with everything it has. Are you ready?" Alaric's laugh was broken glass. "I've been in agony for 20 years. What's a little more?" Mira positioned the knife over Alaric's left wrist, where the silver-blue lines of the sigil converged brightest. "When I open the vein, the curse will try to escape through the wound. I'll use sacred ash to trap it, force it to manifest physically."
She paused.
"But you have to stay conscious. If you pass out, I lose the blood resonance connection, and the sigil goes dormant."
"Can you do that?"
"Yes," Alaric said through gritted teeth. Mira pressed the blade against his skin. "Then, let's end this." The knife cut clean and true. Blood welled up immediately, but it wasn't the normal deep crimson of vampire blood. It glowed silver blue, corrupted by the sigil's presence, pulsing with arcane power that made Myra's teeth ache. The sigil reacted instantly. It surged toward the wound like a predator sensing escape, trying to flood out through the opening and dissipate into the air. But Mira was ready. She pressed her ash-covered hand directly into the bleeding vein, mixing sacred purification with corrupted blood. The effect was catastrophic. The sigil screamed, an actual sound, high-pitched and inhuman, resonating from Alaric's chest. The blood suspended in the air ignited, burning runes blazing white-hot. The curse fought back with vicious intelligence, sending tendrils of pain shooting through Myra's arm that made her vision go white. But she didn't let go. "Alaric," she shouted over the chaos. "Fight it. Your blood, your body, you control it, not the curse." For 20 years, Alaric had been a prisoner in his own flesh, too consumed by agony to do anything but endure. But now, with Myra's interference giving him space to think, to act, he finally understood what the sigil truly was. A parasite, an invader, something that could be rejected. Alaric's eyes blazed crimson with fury that had been building for 2 decades. When he screamed, it wasn't agony. It was pure, incandescent defiance.
"Get out
Of
me."
his blood responded. The droplets suspended in the air began to move, no longer controlled by the sigil, but by Alaric's own will. They dove back toward his body, carrying pieces of the shattered curse with them, forcing the corruption back into the wound where Mira waited with sacred ash and purification prayers. The central knot began to unravel.
Not dissolve, shatter.
Like ice breaking under pressure, the sigil's core fractured into dozens of pieces, each one writhing and burning as it tried to maintain cohesion. Mira pressed harder, mixing more ash into the wound, chanting words in the old language that her grandmother swore could break any curse written in blood. "By moon that watches, by salt that purifies, by faith that endures when magic fails, I cast you out." The sigil gave one final, desperate surge of resistance. The silver-blue lines across Alaric's body blazed so bright the entire chamber was bathed in ghostly light. His back arched off the table with enough force to crack the stone beneath him. Then, with a sound like shattering crystal, the curse broke. The glowing lines fractured and dissolved into harmless wisps of fading light. The blood suspended in the air lost its arcane glow and fell in a crimson rain that soaked the floor. The oppressive weight of corrupted magic that had filled the chamber for the past hour vanished like morning fog under sunlight. Silence fell. Absolute, ringing silence. Mira slumped against the examination table, her hand still pressed to Alaric's wrist, her entire body shaking with exhaustion. She'd done it. Somehow, impossibly, she'd actually done it. Alaric lay motionless on the stone table, his chest barely rising with shallow breaths. The fever had broken. His skin, which had burned with unnatural heat for decades, felt cool beneath Myra's trembling fingers. The silver-blue lines were gone, not hidden, not dormant, but truly, completely gone. Is he? Lady Evelyn's voice broke. Is he alive? Mira pressed her fingers to Alaric's throat, searching for a pulse. For a terrible moment, she felt nothing. Then there, slow and steady, the heartbeat of someone sleeping peacefully rather than unconscious from exhaustion and pain. He's alive, Mira breathed. The curse is gone. He's... Alaric's eyes opened. Not the feral, pain-glazed crimson that had defined him for 20 years. These eyes were clear, aware, sharp with an intelligence that had been trapped behind walls of agony for so long most people had forgotten he possessed it. He blinked slowly, as though seeing the world properly for the first time. His gaze traveled from the shattered windows to the blood-soaked floor to the stunned faces of everyone in the chamber. Finally, his eyes found Myra's. It's gone, he whispered, his voice hoarse but steady. I can't feel it anymore. For the first time since I was 4 years old, there's no pain. Tears streaked down Myra's face.
Yes.
You're free. Alaric slowly sat up, testing his body as though it belonged to a stranger. His movements were careful, controlled, no tremors, no fever weakness, no involuntary convulsions. He looked at his hands, flexed his fingers, then turned to his father. Lord Cashendraven, the vampire king who had conquered 3 territories without flinching, stood frozen with tears streaming down his ancient face. Father, Alaric said clearly, I remember everything. Every moment of the last 20 years. Every person who looked away. Every healer who failed. His voice hardened. And I remember everyone who did this to me. His gaze shifted to Lady Seraphine, still restrained by guards, her expression now carefully blank. Starting with her. Alaric rose from the examination table on steady legs, and the movement sent a ripple of shock through the assembled crowd. For 20 years, they'd known him only as the Broken Prince, the cursed heir who screamed and thrashed in mindless agony. Now he stood before them clear-headed and controlled, radiating an authority that had been buried beneath decades of suffering. Bring them all, Alaric said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd endured the unendurable and survived. Every member of the Shadow Court. I want them here. Now. Lord Cashen nodded to the guards. You heard the prince. Summon the entire council. Within the hour, the throne hall infirmary had transformed into an impromptu court of judgment. The remaining 11 members of the Shadow Court filed in under-armed escort, their expressions ranging from confusion to barely concealed alarm. They'd held power for centuries, advised kings, shaped policy, and now they stood before a prince they'd written off as irrelevant. Lady Seraphine remained restrained near the far wall, her aristocratic composure finally cracking as she watched her carefully constructed conspiracy unravel. Alaric walked among the council members slowly, deliberately. His nostrils flared as he passed each one, reading the scent of their blood the way only someone who'd been intimately connected to blood magic for 2 decades could. Blood remembers, Alaric said softly, stopping before Lord Marcus Thornwell, the council's treasurer. When the sigil fed on me, it created a connection, a resonance. I can smell everyone who touched it, maintained it, strengthened it over the years. He leaned closer to Marcus, whose face had gone pale. You knew. You authorized payments to Theron Ashford for protective services long after the initial installation. recurring payments hidden in the archive's budget. My Lord Prince, I only followed orders. From her, Alaric said, gesturing to Seraphine. But you knew what those payments were for. You knew a child was being tortured, and you helped fund it. Marcus's protective spells, the magical shields every Shadow Court member wore to prevent coercion and mind-reading, flickered and died. The sigil's destruction had severed his connection to the curse's power structure, leaving him defenseless. Yes, Marcus whispered, the truth spilling out against his will. Yes, I knew. The plan was to weaken you, make you unfit to rule. The Shadow Court would govern through a regent until a suitable replacement heir could be arranged. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Lady Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. Alaric moved to the next council member. Lady Helena Ashcroft, Master of Rituals. You renewed the sigil's power 3 times. I can smell your blood signature in the maintenance spells. Helena's shields collapsed like paper in fire. Seraphine said it was necessary, that your bloodline was tainted, that the kingdom needed stronger leadership. My son was 4 years old. Cashin's voice cut through the confessions like a blade.
4.
And you decided he was unfit to live without pain because of political ambition? One by one, Alaric identified the conspirators. 7 of the 11 council members had been involved, some actively maintaining the curse, others simply looking away and accepting bribes to keep silent. As each protective spell collapsed, the truth poured out in desperate, damning confessions. Finally, Alaric stood before Lady Seraphine herself. You were my godmother, he said quietly. You held me when I was an infant. My mother trusted you. Seraphine lifted her chin defiantly. Your father is a tyrant. His bloodline needed to end. I was creating a better future. You were murdering a child slowly, Alaric interrupted, his voice deadly calm. For 20 years. And you called it politics. Cashin stepped forward, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Lady Seraphine Blackthorn, Lord Marcus Thornwell, Lady Helena Ashcroft, and the 4 others who participated in this conspiracy. You are stripped of your titles, your lands, your positions, and your lives. You can't, Seraphine started. I am the Vampire King, Cashin said softly. I can do whatever I wish. He moved with the speed and precision of someone who'd spent centuries perfecting violence. Seraphine's head separated from her body before she could finish her protest. The other conspirators tried to flee, to fight, to plead. It made no difference. Within 5 minutes, 7 members of the Shadow Court lay dead on the blood-soaked floor. The remaining 4 council members, those Alaric had identified as innocent, stood frozen in horror. The Shadow Court is dissolved, Cashin announced to the silent chamber. Effective immediately. Its authority is revoked, its charter burned, its very existence erased from kingdom law. He turned to the 4 surviving members. You will assist in the investigation of every decision the council has made for the past 2 decades. Every hidden payment, every buried report, every conspiracy will be brought to light. Am I clear? Yes, my king, they whispered in unison. Cashin surveyed the carnage with cold satisfaction, then turned. His gaze fell on Mira, still standing beside the examination table, her clothes soaked with Alaric's blood and sacred ash, exhaustion written in every line of her body. Mira Voss, Cashin said, his voice carrying through the chamber. Unbonded human servant. Descendant of moon priests. The woman who saved my son when every vampire healer in the realm had failed. Myra's heart hammered. This was it. The moment when gratitude transformed into suspicion, when saving the prince became evidence of dangerous power that needed to be controlled or eliminated. But Cashin's next words shattered every expectation. Kneel, he commanded. Myra's legs trembled as she dropped to her knees on the blood-slicked floor, certain she was about to die after all. Instead, Lord Cashindraven placed his hand on her head and spoke words that would change the kingdom forever. By the authority vested in me as sovereign of the Nightborn realm, Cashin's voice rang through the chamber. I hereby grant you freedom from all bonds of servitude. You are no longer property, no longer subject to the laws that govern and bonded humans. You are released. Myra's breath caught. Freedom. After a lifetime of running, of hiding her heritage, of living on the margins of vampire society, freedom. But Cashin wasn't finished. However, I would ask something of you. The Vampire King's ancient eyes met hers. The Shadow Court is dissolved, but its purpose, to advise and protect the royal bloodline, remains necessary. We need someone who sees what others miss. Someone who acts when others look away. Someone who understands that power, without compassion, is tyranny. He withdrew his hand from her head and produced a silver chain bearing an obsidian pendant carved with symbols that predated the vampire kingdoms, moon script, the language of her grandmother's people. I created a new position today, Royal Bloodwarden. Neither servant nor noble, neither human nor vampire, but something between. Your authority will supersede court physicians in matters of blood magic. Your word will carry weight in the Royal Council. You will be sworn to protect the heir and investigate any threat to the bloodline from any source, including the throne itself if necessary. Mira stared at the pendant, her mind reeling. My lord, I'm just. You're the woman who saved my son, Cashin interrupted quietly. You're the descendant of moon priests who understood magic we've forgotten. You're someone who risked execution because you couldn't stand to watch suffering without acting. His voice softened almost imperceptibly. You're exactly what this kingdom needs. Mira looked past him to where Alaric stood, watching with an expression she couldn't quite read. After everything they'd been through, the pain, the terror, the desperate fight to break the curse, she barely knew him as a person. Only as a patient, as someone who needed saving. But he was looking at her like she'd given him more than just freedom from pain. Like she'd given him back his future. I accept, Mira whispered. Cashin placed the chain around her neck. The obsidian pendant settled against her chest, warm despite the stone's nature, humming with ancient magic that recognized her bloodline. Rise, Royal Bloodwarden Mira Voss, Cashin commanded. First of your title, may you serve with wisdom and courage. Mira stood on shaking legs. Around the chamber, nobles and servants alike stared at her with expressions ranging from shock to outrage to carefully hidden fear. A human, an unbonded human, elevated to a position of authority in the vampire court. It was unprecedented, revolutionary, dangerous. Lady Evelyn stepped forward, her silver hair catching the dawn light streaming through the shattered windows. For a moment, Mira thought the queen consort might protest. Instead, Evelyn took both of Myra's hands in hers. Thank you, Evelyn whispered, her voice breaking. For seeing my son when everyone else saw only a curse. For believing he could be saved when we'd given up hope. Tears streaked her perfect face. For giving me back my child. She pulled Mira into an embrace that sent another wave of shock through the assembled court. A queen embracing a former servant. The old order was already crumbling. When Evelyn stepped back, Alaric approached. Up close, without the haze of pain distorting his features, Mira could finally see him clearly. He was young, only 24, though the suffering had aged him. His crimson eyes held a sharpness that 2 decades of agony had tried to destroy, but failed to break. I don't know how to thank you, Alaric said quietly. Words seem inadequate. Then don't use words, Mira replied. Just live. Actually live, not just survive. That's enough thanks. Alaric's smile was tentative, unpracticed. The smile of someone who hadn't had reason to use it in 20 years. I'll try to remember how. 3 days later, Mira stood in her new quarters, not servant chambers, but actual rooms in the royal wing with windows overlooking the eastern mountains. She still couldn't quite believe it was real. A knock at her door revealed Alaric, dressed in formal court attire bearing the Nightborn crest. He looked uncomfortable in the elaborate clothes, like someone still getting used to his own body. I'm going to address the full court tonight, he said. Formally claim my position as heir. Father thought you should be present, as Blood Warden. Are you ready for that? Mira asked. It's only been 3 days since. I've been ready for 20 years, Alaric interrupted gently. I just couldn't show it. He paused. Will you walk with me first? I want to see the sunrise. I've never actually watched one without being in agony. They made their way to the highest balcony of the Obsidian Palace, arriving just as dawn broke over the mountains. Golden light spilled across the valleys, painting the world in colors that seemed almost painfully beautiful after so much darkness. Alaric gripped the stone railing, his knuckles white. It doesn't hurt, he whispered, wondering in his voice. The light, the warmth, it just doesn't hurt. Mira stood beside him, watching the prince experience something as simple as sunrise like it was a miracle. In a way, it was. The kingdom will expect things to go back to normal, Alaric said after a long silence. But they can't. Not after this. The Shadow Court is gone. Human magic is no longer heresy. The laws that kept your people oppressed, they'll have to change. That won't be easy, Mira said. No, Alaric agreed. There will be resistance. Nobles who preferred the old order. Factions who see any change as weakness. He turned to face her. But I spent 20 years being tortured because people with power decided their ambitions mattered more than a child's life. I won't let that happen again. Not to anyone. Mira saw the determination in his eyes and understood. The broken prince was gone. In his place stood someone who'd survived the unsurvivable and emerged with a clarity of purpose that would reshape the kingdom. Then we have work to do, Mira said. Alaric's smile was stronger this time. Tomorrow. Tonight, I'm going to do something I haven't done since I was 4 years old. What's that? Sleep through the night, Alaric said simply. Without pain. Without fear. Without wondering if I'll wake up screaming. That evening, after the court assembly where Alaric was formally recognized as heir and Mira stood at his side bearing the obsidian pendant of her new office, after the political maneuvering and whispered conversations and careful reformation of power structures, after all of that, Mira found herself standing outside Alaric's chambers as moonrise approached. The old fear remained. The instinct to check on him, to make sure the curse hadn't somehow regenerated. But when she pressed her ear to the door, she heard only silence. Peaceful, ordinary silence. Inside, Prince Alaric Nightborn lay in his bed, covers pulled up against the evening chill, eyes closed in genuine rest. No restraints. No physicians standing watch. No preparations for nightly agony. Just sleep. The kind of sleep that heals, that restores, that promises tomorrow will be better than today. For the first time in 20 years, the vampire prince slept through the night. And in the morning, when he woke pain-free and clear-headed, he would begin the work of building a kingdom where no child, human or vampire, would suffer in silence, while those with power looked away. The curse was broken. The kingdom would never be the same. And that, Mira thought as she finally returned to her own chambers, was exactly as it should be.
The end.